Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding.
The world that awaits.
Gifts that are yours to explore.
And God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.
Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Karen Saupe. America is the land of opportunity, and many of us fill up our homes with food and toys and furniture and clothing and cars. But what if the rest of the world lived as we did? And does all this stuff really make us happier? We'll be talking about those things today on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Bill McKibben, author of the 1989 bestseller, The End of Nature, as well as 11 other books, including his latest, Deep Economy, The Wealth of Communities and the Durable Future. Welcome, Bill.
Good to be with you.
Americans use as much energy in 2 days as some use in a year.
I think the statistic I used in the book might have been that the average American family, from the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve to dinner on January 2nd, uses more energy than the average Tanzanian family, say, uses all the year through. That gives you some idea of, just what world champion consumers of things we are.
Yeah, does that mean we're using too much or that other people need to use more, need to be able to use more?
It means both.
Okay.
We're using way too much, and there are people around the world who have way too little. And the only way on a finite planet that we're going to solve the problem of people with too little is if we start figuring out how to do without some. Our old notion was that we would just keep, everybody would follow our path, and pretty soon the whole world would be driving cars and, eating steak every night and things. Sure. That's right. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a nice idea, but it runs straight on, we're beginning to realize, into really serious environmental truths. Plan A is not an option because there's not enough stuff to make it happen.
That's true.
Earlier this year, I guess, the Indians announced that they were going to start selling a car for $2,500, enough to allow the car to become a big part of it. Yeah. Well, if the Indians ever owned cars in the same percentage as Americans, the number of cars on the planet, now 800 million, in India alone there'd be about 1.1 billion of them.
Wow.
We don't have enough oil, we don't have enough rubber, and most of all, we don't have enough atmosphere into which to pour the results of that kind of life. So we've got to get serious about whether or not we can build an economy that works for us and that works for others.
And for the rest of the world.
And that also happens to, work on the one planet we happen to be given.
Our culture, American culture, has been built on the principle that more is better and that we'll be happier if we can have more creature comforts. And so it seems like a generous gesture to want the rest of the world to rise to our standards.
For 50 years, the only question we've asked about our economy is, can we make it bigger? That was a reasonable question, but there's at least two other questions that we need to ask too. Can we make it durable so that it lasts and lasts not just for us but for everyone? And can we build an economy that actually satisfies us? One of the good things we need to have in mind as we go into what's going to be a difficult period, I think, environmentally and economically, is the knowledge that the world we've built is not the only possible model. In fact, it hasn't done a very good job of making us happy, any more than it's done a good job of making the planet happy.
Now, up to a point it did, right? I mean, I don't want to live in the Middle Ages.
No. Economists looking around the world are now pretty clear that up to about $10,000 per capita income, so for Americans a family income maybe of about $40,000, up to about that point, rising income correlates pretty well with increases in satisfaction because your basic needs are being met.
To a greater degree. You can have health care and you can have a
enough
nutritious
food,
diet.
Shelter. Past that point, here and around the world, any correlation between increased income and increased satisfaction just disappears. I mean, we know that because, among other things, we've been asking Americans every year since the end of World War II, one of the big polling firms How happy are you? And the number of Americans who say, I'm very happy, peaks in the mid-1950s and goes steadily downhill, even though our standard of living has trebled in that period.
Okay, and so it's not just a matter of other factors in the world that cause distress or anxiety, but
well, I mean, there's lots of things going on in the world, obviously, but one of the things that happens, I think, with the kind of affluence that we have, is that past a certain point, it begins to produce disconnection from the people around you. What have we spent the last 50 years doing? Basically, suburbanizing, building bigger houses farther apart from each other.
Yeah.
That's been the centerpiece of our economy. It's what we spent most of our money on. We considered it the American dream, you know. But the odd result, of course, is that you're a lot less likely to run into other people in the course of a day.
That's true. I walk a mile and a half to work, and I might see 3 people, and I don't know their names.
The average American has half as many friends as they did 50 years ago. That's a pretty big indictment of whatever we've been doing.
But we have cell phones.
We do have cell
so
phones,
we can
and
stand next
and
to
we
each
can
other
go
and
on
talk to other
Facebook,
people.
and there's that. But it seems not to have compensated in terms of sort of the pleasure and meaning in our lives for the kind of rich community that we've abandoned as we've tried to build very individualized lives.
So there's a 2-part problem here. The first is economic, is the assumption, and you hear it on the news every day. I heard it twice this morning. We talk about housing starts, we talk about growth, we talk about new jobs, increased production. All of those as good things. Political candidates talk about growing the economy, and I asked an economist colleague several years ago, why is growth always the standard of success? And he just said, well, that's a good question, and stopped there. And you're saying that it's not anymore.
I'm saying we've reached a place where we got to think a lot more deeply than we have in the past. Economics is a useful, very useful discipline, but it's confined itself to asking one question. How do we make this bigger? And it hasn't asked the question, how do we make this durable, which the environmental crisis now forces us to ask. And it hasn't asked the question, is this really making anybody happy? Economists always assumed that, you know, that their proxy for satisfaction, what the economists would call utility, basically the idea that you could tell what made someone happy by what they bought, was good enough. But recent research in social science and economics and everything else is indicating that, in fact, as I said, it's not good enough, and we're not very well satisfied. And hence, it's a really bad idea for all sorts of reasons, sort of ecological chief among them, to be insisting that the Chinese and the Indians and everybody else follow us exactly down this same path.
Is it, well, Europeans, for instance, are working toward the other direction, I think, consuming less than we do, consuming half the energy we do, is that correct?
Per capita, Western Europeans use half as much energy
but
as we do.
seem to be living at a comfortable standard, most of them.
Not only at a comfortable standard, their level of satisfaction with their lives is higher than ours, and it hasn't declined over recent decades. And it's because they've made different choices in certain ways. I mean, for instance, America talks about family values all the time, you know, but we've never passed the kind of legislation that would make them real. You know, we work much, much harder than people do in Europe. We're not more productive. The most productive workers in the world, hour by hour, are the French. But they take much more of that productivity in terms of leisure.
Is it France where there's a mandated vacation time?
Well, it's a 35-hour work week, and they get so what does that mean? It means that people have time to eat dinner with their families. Well, what do you know? The divorce rate in Western Europe's a lot lower than it is in this country. Yeah, because when you come home and eat dinner with your family, you might actually
get to
learn
know them.
something about them. Yes, enjoy them, and you know, it doesn't do any good to yammer on about family values if your real allegiance is just to making more money for corporate America. You know, I mean, it requires some real choices.
I think your book mentioned that the average house, the average garage now is the size of the average house 100 years ago?
Look, the average house in this country has almost doubled in size, new house, in the last 20 years, even as the number of people living in it has shrunk by almost a whole person. Well, that's an ecological nightmare. You know, you got to heat and cool all that extra space, but it's also, there's just something sad about it.
It isolates us.
There was a story in the New York Times about 6 months ago. One of the, if you ever drive by the sort of huge new houses that have been built and wonder, as I do, what exactly is in that kind of institution the size of a junior high school up there on that, you know, it turns out that one of the answers is that much upscale housing in recent years has been built with dual master bedrooms. You know, the husband snores, the wife pulls the sheets off. The American answer to this dilemma, 900 more square feet, you know.
Because you need that much space to sleep.
Well, that's right, but there's just something sort of pathetic about the idea of the richest people in the world kind of, you know, you're hunkered down in your cave, peering out at your mate across the hall.
Yes. We want more stuff. And yet last Christmas I thought about what gifts I could give my family that they would need and benefit from and wouldn't just clutter up the house. More and more I seek the smallest gifts I can find because they'll take up less space.
In fact, we don't really want more stuff.
Right.
We've run this program through the Methodist Church in the Northeast. I'm Methodist for many years, called $100 Holiday, about the way people celebrate Christmas.
Tell us about that.
And we pastors asked their flock to try to spend $100 per family at Christmas instead of the more than 1,000 that's common, so quite different. And instead to give homemade gifts, gifts of service, that kind of thing. When we started this, it was with kind of, you know, pious environmental intent, all those batteries and, you know, and all the people sort of going into debt to provide a good Christmas and whatever. Well, it didn't work for that reason. The reason it worked for us and for all the places that we tried it was because it turns out people loathe Christmas now. You know, if you poll people around Thanksgiving, the number of Americans who say they're dreading Christmas is 3 times the number who say they're anticipating it.
Sure.
It's too much. It's craziness. And if we can, you know, certainly the church can help us in this one occasion pull back a little bit from the kind of baptism of endless consumption that is no longer doing anything for us.
And so if you have an agreement with the others in your family or your community that we're limiting it. I mean, my cousin was telling me last Christmas about a gift exchange at the hospital where she works, where I think they limited themselves to $10 or $5 a person, and she said people had to get so creative. And it was so much fun. Not that nobody gets for Christmas the socks they really need anymore.
Think about, you know, giving, say, your granddaughter a piece of jewelry for Christmas, okay? Well, you could go out to the mall and buy her a gold chain off a spool someplace, and she'd be okay with it. But say you went and found, you know, the piece of jewelry you'd worn to your prom, and you gave it to her with a note that described what you were like then and what it meant to you. Which piece of jewelry you think is going to mean more to her in the long run?
When I was 10, my great-grandmother sent me a box of stationery and I think it was $1 and a letter, and it's the letter I've kept, that said that when she turned 10, her big brother gave her a dime, and she was so excited, and she bought a box of stationery. And her letter said, I'm sure this $1 will mean far less than the dime meant to me, and so forth. And it was so powerful for me at that age even, and when my niece turned 10, I think I sent her, you know, $10 with the same sort of idea in it. But it's that sense, how could I find a gift that will mean that much to someone and fill a void in their life? And I do want to say, I mean, I'm overgeneralizing. Obviously, there are families in America and all over the world who really do need that pair of socks for Christmas, for whom that really will be special. But it's this gap.
Well, and at the moment, you know, our economy is busily providing more to people who already have too much,
wealthy,
and not much to people who don't have it. I mean, you know, in every way. I mean, look at this kind of way that our society, just in almost cartoon terms, has become too large. You know, we live in houses, as we've said, that are much bigger than we could possibly need. We drive around in semi-military vehicles that, you know, 15, 20 years ago would have been reserved for forest rangers who might actually need them. You know, just, you know, as a society as a whole, we've become larger than we need to be, as
Sure.
the doctors keep telling us.
Is it just habit? My mother walked into the room the day after Christmas and said, we should go to the outlet mall. Well, and we did.
Partly it's habit. We're sort of told almost to do it all the time. I mean, what did President Bush? What was his first impulse in the
After
aftermath
9/11,
of 9/11?
go
I
shopping.
mean, first impulse was let's bomb somebody, but second impulse was go back to normal, return to shopping. That's how he put it, which was very sad. You know, if we'd taken that moment, if he'd said instead, you know, job number one is to put Osama bin Laden in a box, but job number two is to make sure we're never in this situation again. We're going to put a $1 tax on gasoline tomorrow so that we can stop using so much of, you know, that Middle Eastern oil, and we're going to put solar panels on top of half the houses in America before I leave office. We were all in a state of shock and sadness, and we would all have saluted.
We would have
and
considered
said, yes,
a new option.
Let's do it.
I remember when I was a child, and we were just starting to hear about recycling, and I was, I think, in junior high, some friends and I got very excited about this, and so I was sort of hyper-conscious about energy savings, and gave my father a lecture about turning off the lights when he wasn't in the room. And he told me that when he was little during World War II, they grew up in rationing, and he had gone through sacrificing and not having what he needed, and he was not going back. He wasn't going to fail to have what he wanted. And I wonder how much of that mentality has shaped now several generations of I need more because when I was young I didn't have enough.
Well, it's certainly not shaping our current generation.
Exactly, I've never been deprived.
We've all had enough.
Yeah.
And, you know, which may mean it's possible for us to start to be the generations that move away from that.
Sure.
Who weren't traumatized by want in our childhoods.
But the TV tells me I need more.
Well, if there's one little secret, it's to turn off the TV a lot. You know, I wrote a book
during
about
this show.
I wrote a book about television years ago. Nobody goes out and, you know, stands by a lake in the woods and says, boy, there could be some more rocks over there and really another grove of trees along that shore. No, it's sufficient. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And, you know, our inability to even begin to think about that in terms of our own lives is a problem we've got to overcome. You know, it's a particular paradox for a nation that thinks of itself as a Christian nation.
Yes.
You know, many of us ostensibly followers of someone who told us to give away everything we had to the poor and follow him.
The second part of your book talks about some solutions. You, for a year, tried to live on locally produced food. How'd that go?
Well, it went great. We spent the whole winter in New England, sort of October to May, just eating nothing that didn't come out of our small valley. I didn't know whether we'd be able to do it when we started. We began in part because our local brewery announced that it was going to start making beer with wheat that one of the farmers down in the valley was growing. So I figured if worst came to worst, I'd make it through, yes. But in fact, it turned out to be a winter of excellent eating. More to the point, and the thing I really was interested in sort of finding out, the greatest benefit was simply the number of new friends that we made, the farmers, all of that. You know, we've set up this food system that seems normal to us, where the average bite of food travels 2,000 miles before it reaches your lips.
Right.
But it's, in fact, A, ecologically ruinous, B, the food doesn't taste very good, and C, it's designed to make sure that you never know anyone, you know, that has anything to do with it.
That surprised me in the book. I mean, I never think about that. When I take a box out of the grocery, it doesn't occur to me that I've missed out on lots of relationships.
The fastest growing part of the food economy all of a sudden in this country is local farmers markets. And the reason for that is that people want to meet the farmer and the, you know, it shouldn't be too surprising to us because that's how people have always shopped. We think of the farmer's market as something
some new
odd,
invention.
esoteric, but in fact that's just how people have shopped for food since the beginning of agriculture. What's new and weird is the supermarket, you know, with, you know, 19 aisles of high fructose corn syrup shaped into slightly different products.
Right,
you know? But you know, we've got real possibilities. These local economies are less environmentally disruptive, but they're also, probably even more important, help us to reestablish the kind of human connections
Relationships.
that undergird the satisfaction we've been missing.
And again, there's the economic side of this too. I mean, I love the way this is, the money issues and the human issues just go hand in hand. We pay half of what our grandparents paid for food, and yet farmers today receive just a small fraction of the money we pay.
And there aren't very many of them anymore. That's why it's exciting to watch in a few places, Vermont, where I live, Oregon, places, Madison, Wisconsin, places where local food has really caught on, to watch suddenly the market allowing lots and lots of young people to go back into farming. And there are lots and lots of young people who want to do it. I have students at Middlebury College, where I teach in Vermont, you know, who've come through college and they've paid $160,000 or whatever to get through school, and all they want to do when they get
wealthy,
out
privileged
is
kids who want to be farmers.
And you know, I try to sort of stay away from their parents at commencement because they're not always overjoyed, but the kids are overjoyed and they're ready to participate in the real world.
Oh, that's great. That's great. You canned food when you were doing, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine what.
We have all kinds of technology, you know, that makes it easier, like the freezer, than our parents did. But
so you're not talking about going back to a standard of living that the average American had 200 years ago or 500 years ago. You're really just talking about simplifying.
I think we need to move ahead in technology in certain ways, and I think we need to move back in technology in certain ways. If you're going to drive a car, make sure it's a hybrid car or a plug-in hybrid car. But you know what? Better to, if you can, and many Americans live in places where they can, take a step back technologically and get that bicycle out of the garage. You know?
Oh, it's so much fun.
So much fun, and you know, by the time you're done, you're actually healthy and look good, and you know, save some money on the doctor and all the other things. I mean, the possibilities are really there, and you know, for Americans, I think dealing with the environmental crisis that we find ourselves in is going to be very good, very therapeutic. You know, we use way too much energy, and we'll be much happier if we figure out how to use a little less.
Eating locally lets your community be self-sustaining. Ultimately, do you think this is the future for the whole world, to create small, self-contained communities?
I think that we're never going to retreat entirely from globalization. I think there's plenty of reasons and plenty of possibilities, especially with the internet, to continue to sort of exchange information and ideas. But I think that sort of taking commodities back and forth around the world is, as someone said, you know, it makes a lot more sense to use the internet to trade recipes than it does to use sort of airplanes to fly vegetables.
That really intrigued me. I think somehow I was expecting you to sort of dismiss the internet as part of part of the problem, and yet you had some interesting ideas about how that can be part of making our lives better.
We don't yet know for sure, I think, how everything's going to play out with the internet, but I think it's incredibly interesting. We've used it in the last year to organize several thousand demonstrations around the country about climate change, the first big grassroots movement about climate. And we couldn't have done it without the way that the net allowed us to connect people. So I think it's possible that we'll be able to live local economic lives in exchanging things with our neighbors and very much in communion with our neighbors, and at the same time still have a window open onto the larger world, so that the breeze from around the planet can blow out old prejudices and blow in new ideas. And
that's what I think I can imagine. Local economies sort of take me back to thoughts about medieval sort of tribalistic cultures and so forth, and the danger there is that these small communities isolate themselves from others. But you're saying we can kind of have it both ways.
I think we can have it both ways. We don't need to be cloistered, and at the same time we don't need to be absolute free agent hyper individuals just doing our own thing all the time.
Right.
The possibility for community is the most important possibility we've got to experiment with, socially and environmentally. We haven't been good at it. We've spent the last 20 years telling ourselves that individuals are all that matter. you know, that anything public is bad and anything private is good.
Right.
We got to get away from that ideology, and I think maybe we will in the face of the problems it's caused.
I think that's what delighted me the most about your book was finally it wasn't simply a call to sacrifice and give up what we think makes us happy, even if it doesn't, but an acknowledgement that there's something better for us if we're willing to change and reframe the way we think. I want to mention very quickly 2 websites. The first is yours, BillMcKibben.com, because I wish we had time to talk about all the rest of your books and experiments. And the other is the website Consumer Consequences, which offers information about the choices we make. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.
I look forward to reading the next book you write, whatever that turns out to be about. My guest today has been Bill McKibben, author of the book Deep Economy, The Wealth of Communities and the Durable Future. I'm Karen Saupe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.
Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
The world that awaits.
Gifts that are yours to explore.
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.